part of our mission, we're unlocking the region's potential, the future of the people living in this area. As a think tank, we're not just doing research, but also organizing discussions and debates around most pressing issues relevant to our region. We have different dimensions of our work, different thematic priorities, and one of the priorities is one of our priority areas is to build the cooperation among other regions of the world. So in this way, we're organizing different discussions in the format of C5+1. And we're happy to partner and to host our partners from Bursa Bazaar Foundation. Warm welcome to our office and to host this wonderful panel discussion. So, Imran, please, over to you.
Thank you very much. I very appreciate it. So, on behalf of the Bursa Bazaar Foundation and the Rihla Initiative for Green Economic Growth, I'm delighted to welcome you to our panel here in Almaty, the fifth and final in our regional sessions in our series. We're particularly grateful to Kazakhstan and Rihla for their support and collaboration in hosting us today, and to our participants joining us in person and online from across Central Asia and the Gulf. Thank you for being with us. Over the past 6 months, the Rihla Initiative has been working to build a new platform for Gulf engagement in the global South, one that places policy, strategy, and long-term development impact at the heart of climate finance investments. This first phase of the initiative was Gulf capital, which is already flowing at scale, can be better aligned with the priorities, capacities, and development visions of partner regions. We are asking, what would it take to ensure that Gulf climate finance delivers not only a green transition, but a just transition as well? The Central Asia and the Caucasus region occupies a unique and strategic place in this conversation. It is emerging as a critical source of clean energy, mineral wealth, and economic connectivity, and the Gulf states are increasingly recognizing the opportunities this presents. But with opportunity comes with responsibility as well. So investments must not only be commercially viable, but regionally responsive, tailored to fragile contexts, varied political economies, and the need for green growth to reinforce both national sovereignty and regional cooperation. Today's panel is designed to reflect that complexity. It brings together several members of Rihla's Policy Council and Gulf Committee, as well as the Rihla team, including Shafta Kamalidinova, the principal author of a recent policy brief which was published this morning. This panel is an opportunity to test these ideas, interrogate assumptions, and build shared understanding about how Gulf Central Asia partnerships can be made more impactful, inclusive, and future-oriented. But also, let me briefly situate today's discussion within the broader structure of the relationship. We have convened a policy council of around 50 experts from the Gulf and 4 focus regions, so the Middle East and North Africa, Central Asia and the Caucasus, South and Southeast Asia, and Sub-Saharan Africa. Our implementation council brings together leaders from the worlds of finance, infrastructure, and sustainable development, which is the focus of our next phase. A dedicated Gulf committee of 12 GCC nationals and Gulf-based experts support the strategic positioning of Gulf actors in this aspect as well. Additionally, we have also formed 6 focus groups exploring key thematic areas, from blue economy and green industrialization to sustainable agriculture, green hydrogen, and the competition and cooperation with China. Over the past month, we have released 5 regional policy briefs, as well as the Rihla Handbook as a guide to accelerating Gulf climate finance in the global South. All of these efforts are feeding into the Rihla Policy Forum, which will be held in just a few weeks in Doha. There, we will bring together council members to refine our recommendations ahead of the next phase of the initiative, its implementation phase, which will culminate in the Rihla Summit that will take place in Abu Dhabi in September of 2026. Again, thank you very much for joining us today. I'm looking forward to a thoughtful discussion. I'm also having the pleasure of moderating this session. So we'll start with Shafta. So as the lead author of the Rihla Central Asia and the Caucasus, you mapped out a wide array of sectoral needs, institutional gaps, and Gulf engagement opportunities. What are the most actionable cost-cutting recommendations for deepening GCC Central Asia and the Caucasus collaboration on Rihla? What lessons stand out to you?
Thank you very much, Rihla. Before answering to your questions, I would like to thank all policy council members for Central Asia and the Caucasus for their contributions during the online engagements, and for the Rihla team, and also the Gulf Committee members who joined for the workshop and dissemination. And ultimately, at the end of the presentation, I would like to highlight that the best information would be creating Gulf-based regional institutional platform to support and to coordinate all the investments coming to the region, to all countries in the region from the Gulf investors. Because during the engagements and during the research, we came up to the point that all countries are different and all projects are country by country, and we don't have the regional outlook and regional institution to manage and to coordinate those investments. The second recommendation is to also include not only governmental agreements and projects, but also include to create a window for small and medium enterprises to participate in those projects and investments. Because me and also council members for Central Asia and Caucasus believe that this is important to have inclusive green growth across the region in all countries. And the last thing I would say that this engagement, the Gulf investment across the Caucasus should be mutually beneficial. And the Central Asian countries, as the Central Asian countries and the countries in the Caucasus, we should consider the interest of Gulf investors as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Shahla. So it's actually important to come back to this point about our framing of the region, I think, as well, in the sense that adding Caucasus to Central Asian countries. Obviously, this is not a typical way of looking at the broader region, but we really wanted to do so in the sense of really looking at ways in which Azerbaijan, Georgia, and Armenia could also get involved into the discussions with the broader, let's say, Central Asian and Caucasus region. To build on that and get more specific, let's say, I'll turn to Arusha, who's our policy council member for the Central Asian and Caucasus and is based here in Kazakhstan. So we're very privileged to have you here in person. You wrote a piece for us recently for the Rihla initiative on the importance of critical minerals in our discussion. And I think it's very clear that there's a global race for critical minerals right now, and it's accelerating, and Central Asia sits on major efforts itself. How can Gulf investments help build sustainable, value-added, and locally beneficial critical mineral supply chains to Central Asia and the Caucasus? Are there governance or industrial policies already in place to make this possible?
Thank you so much, Mihan. Thank you so much, Aida, and to both of you for organizing this interesting event. On the critical minerals topic, before we talk about investments, let's talk interest first, right? So Gulf states have clearly stated that mining sector is going to be important for diversifying their economies away from oil. Saudi Arabia has its Vision 2030, where mining is a key pillar of diversification. And then UAE has Operation 300 BN strategy for industrial sector development. Now, the goal here is not only to extract raw materials, both domestically and internationally, but also to create midstream and downstream processes. So refined products that will be also part of the global value chains. For Central Asia, interests are quite similar. In a way, for example, I'm talking Kazakhstan. Now critical minerals is very big on the agenda, and the goal is also to stimulate and encourage process rather than just extracting raw materials, as it was the lesson I think we learned from oil. Right? And here we need to find a middle ground where Gulf interests and Central Asian states' interests could align, and that means that it has to be around actually creating some shared also value. For example, Central Asian states have major geological resources. I wouldn't call them reserves yet, because reserves have to be economically viable to extract. And there are significant reserves, but also even more resources to actually research if they have the economic potential to be extracted. And that's where investments are mostly needed. And many European, Western companies are engaged in that activity. So they are investing in exploration. They're trying to find certain mines have significant reserves. So this is the stage where we are at now. The legislation is being revised. I mean, Kazakhstan adopted its transformative subsoil code in 2018. Uzbekistan did it last year. Of course, there are many areas for improvement, as there always are, but I think this represents a major step toward making it an investor-friendly jurisdiction. So I think at the end of the day, it all comes up to Central Asia can create the right environment for Gulf investments to come, and if it can also capture some value local, rather than just exporting loans.
Thank you very much. Again, raw materials for critical minerals is the cornerstone, let's say, of the energy transition projects that have been expanding across Central Asia, the Caucasus, why the GCC states, as we know, Mastar, Mubadala, Aqua Power are very active in this region, but critical minerals is a critical component of, let's say, this the engagements across this region. But in line with this, we have the question of China. And I want to turn to Yunus, our colleague, who's a policy council member for Central Asia and the Caucasus, who's from Azerbaijan, but is based in Istanbul at the moment. So Yunus, China remains the dominant external player in the green infrastructure, energy, and logistics across Central Asia and the Caucasus. In this context, how can GCC actors balance their relationship with China while also ensuring local involvement in projects? Are there models of triangular cooperation between the GCC, Central Asia states, and China that could be scaled, in your opinion?
So first, hello, dear colleague. I hope that you can hear me, and
Yes.
Thanks for the question. So I think we can tell that there's already triangular cooperation between Gulf countries, let's say particularly United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and Central Asia and South Caucasus, particularly in Central Asia, Uzbekistan. And from South Caucasus, Azerbaijan is the main active player, that there's a completed project and there's ongoing project, and also Chinese actor. So all three sides has own actually advantage. Gulf countries has capital and actually strategic financing. China is the main champion in the currently in terms of renewable energy and renewable energy technology. And the Central Asia and South Caucasus is a growing market in terms of the green energy, that they are eager to attract investment, and they try to develop their regulatory environment in order to create favorable business the conditions for companies, private sectors, and international companies. So they are all complementary. And currently, what we see actually, the Gulf countries, particularly United Arab Emirates, regarding the Mastar and Aqua Power from Saudi Arabia are the main player in renewable energy sector. They play a role as a project developer. And there's a Chinese companies that Aqua and Mastar mostly sign agreement for engineering, procurement, and construction as a engineering, procurement, and construction contractor, because they have they can offer affordable product with good quality and also speed for the execution of the project. And we saw that both sides cooperate each other to execute projects in Azerbaijan and Uzbekistan, and probably in the coming years in Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan, or Georgia and Armenia. So, but what we see that actually current cooperation align each party's interest, because both Uzbekistan and Azerbaijan eager to increase renewable energy, electricity capacity, for meet their domestic need, and also export electricity to European Union. But there's a still huge window for more development, particularly in terms of localization, because what we see today, there's a limited localization from Chinese companies. They mostly import their own renewable energy component from their countries, because they're already huge supply chain in their domestic market. So they also over capacity to export it. But they need to actually rebalance it through the years. They need to add more component, more layer for much better and much complex the cooperation. So there's a range of ways to do that actually. The first is about Gulf countries has a huge opportunity and leverage, because as I mentioned, they have a capital. So they can use this strategic finance to add condition at this relative localization for host countries. It's also beneficial for Gulf countries because this also reduce their dependency on Chinese companies in the long term. Also help to Central Asian or Caucasian countries to climb up in the value chain, reduce the cost, and diversify their partnerships in the long term, which is very important. So how can they do that? There's a first, as I mentioned, there's a way to do that through the financing. For example, performance-based escrow funds, it can be beneficial, or adding the financing condition to, for example, through they can provide financing, but they can add also requirement for Chinese companies or other international companies to localize some part of their production in Uzbekistan or Azerbaijan, for example. This can be also beneficial. Or maybe there's another way to, as you know, currently international companies, Gulf and Mastar, they choose engineering or procurement contractor through the tender. They, rather than doing the one tender, they can do the multi-EPC or modular procurement system, because they can help to choose civil works, grid interconnection, storage system, are tendered separately, and pave the way for joining of the local companies. This is also another way to integrate the local companies and local people to more the renewable energy projects in Central Asia and the South Caucasus. And there's a third way, and actually it's also much easier way to Gulf companies or Gulf sovereign fund of Gulf countries, by the way to cooperate with Central Asia, they can create training and certification hub for just providing vocational skills and creating actual workforce pipeline for Gulf-backed renewable energy projects. This all three, the cooperation mechanisms through financing or multi-partner, the procurement, or also training hub, can help to clean up, can help Central Asian countries to clean up in the value chain, develop their human capital, and also contribute more renewable energy projects rather than only utilizing renewable energy electricity. And I think that this can also contribute and help to deepen more Gulf countries and Central Asian countries' relationship.
Thank you very much. This is very important because in our first workshop that we had on Central Asia and the Gulf, in terms of this project of initiative on climate financing, I learned a lot in the sense of the role of China. And for me, it really, what stood out is really how the Gulf, particularly Aqua Power and Mastar, are implementing all of their projects in Central Asia with collaboration and partnership with the Chinese. In some essence, it's good when we look at triangular cooperation and whatnot, but one of our policy council members raised a very important issue during that workshop, and she is from Uzbekistan, and she's involved in basically in the renewable energy field, and her company is largely being left out in majority of these tenders by the GCC states who are working in Central Asia and Uzbekistan more broadly because of their competition with China. So in some ways it's a rosy picture, but in other ways, if we look at it, it does have a detrimental impact on, let's say, the local community, and the way localization is not working in the context of Central Asia is an important factor to really consider. And when it comes to the Chinese role, it's even more important because we do have that triangular context of investment. So I'll move to Mohammed Al-Breiki, who's our Gulf committee member, who's from Oman but based in Doha, and he's joining us now. And Mohammed, I wanted to reach to you and say you've been closely involved in driving Gulf investment in green sectors abroad as part of your work for the GCC. What trends are you seeing in how GCC countries are approaching the Central Asia region, and how can these investments become more systemic and strategic and aligned with both local priorities and Gulf development goals and diversification efforts themselves?
Well, can you hear me and see me first?
Yes.
Okay, good. First of all, I want to thank Peruz and Bazar Foundation, as well as Central Asia Policy Studies, for hosting us and being in this panel. Well, if I want to recap the question again to answer it, in a spot, what are the major trends that are driving investments from the GCC all the way to Central Asia? Well, so I would mention that there are 5 trends. So I'm going to mention the name of the trend and I'll give an example. So it's going to be clear and easy to follow. So the first trend, as other colleagues mentioned, is renewable energy, but I will add renewable energy plus storage. So we know that Aqua Power from KSA and Masdar from UAE are currently investing in Central Asia. For example, Masdar is investing in wind farm plus solar farm. Moreover, lately Masdar is also not investing only in power generation. They are also investing in grid transition. Sorry, not energy storage. So they are producing the energy as well as storing this energy in batteries. So Masdar is currently investing in Kazakhstan, like 200 megawatt battery energy storage system to support renewable energy integration. So this is the first trend. Second trend, which is belong to me a lot, which is industrialization. I mean, when we look at export and imports, we know that, or we have seen that a lot of Central Asia countries exporting minerals from Central Asia to the world. On the other hand, when I looked at the GCC and Central Asia, we noticed that Central Asia imports chemicals from the GCC countries. So, collaborating in this will boost the collaboration between both regions. Third trend is related to infrastructure plus urban development. We know that currently a lot of GCC countries are investing in Central Asia. Fourth trend is related to water and hydropower, and here I want to mention Qatar, which with the Nipras Power, they are investing in hydropower plant in Tajikistan, and they're planning to build one of the largest hydropower plant. Last trend that I want to mention, and I was expecting to hear it, but I did not, which is gas investment. Currently, since the GCC countries are very advanced when it comes to gas development, currently some of the GCC countries are investing in gas processing plants in Central Asia. And as you know, gas is, I would say, is a commodity that will help in transition toward the green economy, instead of moving directly to renewable energy. So these are the major trends that we can see, that drives GCC investments toward Central Asia. Hopefully, I answered the question in a systematic approach.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Shahid, before I move to Zohra, so you're also leading the Green Hydrogen Focus Group for the Rihla initiative. And as Mohammed just mentioned, gas is an important topic to consider within this context. So how do you see that transition between the importance of gas investments and, let's say, its relation to green hydrogen itself? So how would that really fall in place in the context of Central Asia?
Thank you very much, Mirhan. Before answering to your question, I would like to highlight that 3 weeks ago, mid-September, the first pilot project by Aqua Power in Uzbekistan in green hydrogen started its operations. So it's green hydrogen. So the energy is coming from the wind farm in the different part of in the Bukhara part of the Uzbekistan. And this green hydrogen is located in the Tashkent region. The distance is far from Bukhara to Chirchik. But surprisingly, when I first heard about this pilot project, I was surprised, like, oh wow, like in Uzbekistan, like we have this green hydrogen project, like the first one in the region. And I was a bit, how to say, controversial. Like I couldn't believe that it will start its operation, but it started, which means that there is still hope to generate green hydrogen in Uzbekistan. But coming back to your question, yes, yes. I mean, maybe all other projects like future projects in hydrogen, it should not be specifically focused on green hydrogen because it's impossible, in my opinion, to build and locate green hydrogen in all Central Asian countries because we have different capacities in the energy and energy production. So as Mohammed Al-Briki mentioned that probably gas would be involved in it and we will have more projects on the blue hydrogen. And since I also wrote my chapter for the upcoming edited volume on the green hydrogen, I think that maybe with the help, with the capital from and expertise from the Gulf countries, within the Central Asian countries, we can generate different colors of hydrogen, let's say, and it could lead us to the other markets, other countries, maybe in the European Union, maybe in East Asia, or maybe we will have the ways where we can use the hydrogen locally in the industrialization within the region.
Great, thank you very much. Yeah, obviously, blue hydrogen is a bit far from the work that we want to do in the context of green economic development, but at the same time, as Mohammed mentioned, we can't really neglect it because it's one of the major let's say sources of revenue for many of these countries. So it is important to consider it and be able to contextualize it within the context of this green transition as well, because again, we can't really neglect it. I'll turn to Zohra. Thanks for joining us from Tajikistan today for this panel. And I'll formally a question really around Tajikistan, but obviously I would like to hear your point of view on the regional context and let's say a regional integrated approach to this question. So Tajikistan represents a different case of green development in Central Asian context. So what are some of the key governance or political factors that shape its capacity to absorb and manage Gulf climate investments? What are the unique challenges and opportunities for Gulf engagement in fragile or lower economy countries like Tajikistan?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Gulf. Thank you, Kapsan Loka. Thank you, Bursan Bazar, for the opportunity to speak about it. And I think we have a lot in common with all Central Asian countries. We are in the transition to the green economies. We have a very high political will that is expressed. Not only the policies have been adopted and being adopted for the green economy to be, however, there is still all of us need lots of money. And I will give the example for Tajikistan to actually implement its national development strategy, which includes green economy. We need at least $8.41 billion by 2030. So basically we need $1 billion a year to implement, to have a climate finance plan. And it's, if you look through this, you can also ask another question. How much actually Central Asia needs for having a green or green energy or energy per se, which would be needed for economy development for nearest future. And according to UNICEF in its report of 2023 estimation, it's $20 billion are needed for Central Asian energy sector in general. And out of it, I will just go immediately to Rangoon because it's like a mega project in Central Asia, which going to feed the rest of the region and outside. Rangoon needs to finalize it, complete work, more than $6 billion. And recently, Gulf states, especially Islamic Bank, secured funding $550 million to invest in Ragun, and that also includes the funding coming from some of the GCC countries, and Mohammed basically mentioned some of them. So what we are actually saying that the scale of need to develop and go to the green energy and green economy, it's actually quite high, and ambition is quite high, and it's actually centralized by political will of all countries of Central Asia. And not only, there is very high commitment to this. That's why we have institutional and basically political policy development toward this, and it's actually ongoing process. However, we also have the old infrastructures and old policies which compete with this. So there is some sort of like, inertia which is pushing it back, and there is energy which is actually trying to move forward. I also have to say that there is still we have issues on legal and regulatory frameworks and planning and oversight. And I think it's not only Tajikistan, but all the Central Asian countries have the same issue. It's spatial urban construction laws are not yet climate aware, for example, or there is gaps on integrating climate risk into the regulation planning. And I would be very sure that this is exactly the same thing happening in Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, and Turkmenistan, because the whole notion of green economy and green energy and etc. is actually moving quite forward as an idea, but then the institutions have to follow, and we have to really be very much aware of it. We again, Mohammed very nicely put on what are the investments, and we have very much investors coming, and largest investor from GCC state is United Arab Emirates, investing with the onto the project on clean energy, floating solar and hydropower, etc. Masdar is the one who is the largest, the investor. The same companies are investing in the rest of the Central Asian countries. Also, we have Qatar investing $182 million on the Ragun hydropower station, which this all things are new. So the memorandums are signed, there is clear interest. However, we are still on a very early stage. We cannot really make assumptions. Saudi Arabia expressed, like Aqua, expressed interest on building solar power capacity cooperation and education and infrastructure, aiding 11 schools, 20 million, and ring roads on $30 million. So we have a combination of different activities happening. The question is how all these puzzles are going to create one big picture and how it will work. I remember our discussion with the GCC think tanks in Istanbul and then in Tashkent, and one of the concern was all these projects which are funded by Masdar and Aqua have a wonderful progress. However, the question is how this electricity not only going to be stored, as Mohammed mentioned, but how it's going to be connected to the general grid of electricity within the Central Asia. How these all investments into the energy going to really put in the same market of energy of Central Asia, and they are going to really help each other in that. So these questions are still remaining. The question is how it's going to work all together, not as a separate projects. And another issue is, of course, whether GCC countries are viewed only as a check pocket, or they're actually going to be influencing the change of the policies and coming with the ideas on the policy and different other activities. So this is actually a very interesting turn, because before it was more about they will bring the technology, they will build it, they will just give it, and no one would actually question. However, more and more, GCC countries are interested not only bringing the technology and investing in this technology, but they also want to see the transparency. They want to see activities on the local level like PPTs, and they also want to see the changes in the policies which will be helpful and beneficial for future investment. I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was excellent. It also leads to our next topic to discuss, which is, you touched on it. We actually organized the first GCC Central Asia workshop 2 years ago in Istanbul at the Bursa Mazar Foundation. And in April of this year, we had the first GCC C5 think tank forum, where we brought representatives from think tanks from all over the GCC and the C5 countries. And for us, the most important thing was all of these first, because they didn't exist before. And that's a fact in the sense of engagements between the GCC states and Central Asian countries are relatively new within the context of, let's say, global engagements. For example, even embassies have been established in the past decade in Doha or Abu Dhabi or elsewhere in the region by Central Asian countries, and vice versa. And in some cases, they're combining ambassadorial positions as well. So a prerequisite for expanding relationships is an existence of an embassy, let's say, as the primary step. And building on that requires more mutual discussions and platforms for engagement. So it was 2 years ago that the first GCC Central Asia Summit, high-level summit, took place in Saudi Arabia, where the leaders of the five Central Asian countries and the 6 GCC states met for the first time, let's say, in the context of a multilateral forum. And the second summit was supposed to take place in May of this year, but it had to be rescheduled, hopefully to later this year or early next year, because of Trump's trip to Saudi Arabia, UAE, and Qatar. So the leaders at that time were preoccupied, let's say, with hosting the guest. But hopefully that will take place sooner rather than later. But again, all of these are points of engagement between the Central Asian countries and the GCC states. But aside from the summit itself, which is high level with the leaders, there has been multiple ministerial meetings, which is also an important contribution to expanding these relationships. But within this context, we have realized that Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan are, let's say, the leaders in attracting climate financing from the region, but also investments more broadly. Aruzhan, I'll come to you. So Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan are emerging as also key players within the global critical minerals landscape. So in generally speaking, all from the 5 C5 countries, these two are really leading the pack in every context that we're looking at. So what role do you think the Gulf investors realistically play in this context in really prioritizing Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan? Is it because of this, they're nationally endowed with these critical minerals, or is there more to look into this? And whether we can replicate or scale for other Central Asian countries as well?
Well, just economically speaking, geological potential, at least the estimates that are out there are greater in these two countries, largely because of size, like different geological features. But as I said earlier, much of that potential is yet untapped. So when we talk about mining projects, these are usually long-term projects. So before you get from exploration to mining, it usually takes more than 10 years. Under optimistic conditions, I would say. So this is precisely where long-term capital is needed. And I believe that because Gulf capital is usually backed by sovereign capital, that is what Gulf's comparative advantage is. On the other hand, Gulf countries have used different mechanisms. For example, recently Qatar Investment Authority, they invested around $500 million into Ivanhoe. Ivanhoe Mines is a Canadian mining giant, which is exploring copper mines in East Kazakhstan region. So that's another way to do it. You don't necessarily need to invest, like to have your own companies invest in it. You can simply, diffuse, you can simply invest some capital into the existing companies and help them, find what is actually needed. So I guess that's another way to do it. Also, the Gulf countries could realistically establish certain joint ventures. I mean, mechanisms are different, but when it comes to real implementation, what actually matters is what conditions we as Central Asian governments, be it Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, create for the investors to actually make it commercially viable. And I can't really ignore this topic of commercial viability because mining is its nature is very resource intensive. I mean, we're talking already about a lot about different aspects of Gulf engagement, but I think we also have to be aware of the risks. So if we look at project costs and mining is very capital intensive. It requires a lot of water resources, energy, preferably cheap energy, human capital, and like at the end of the day, like technology. I'm not even mentioning that, but also transportation costs. So how are transport links between the Gulf and Central Asia evolving? Given the current scales of trade, I believe that there is much more potential to improve this transportation links. So I guess we have to be very practical and pragmatic when we're talking this cooperation, not only in terms of high political will and this forums. By the way, I think this week is going to be an investor forum between GCC and Central Asia in Bishkek, which is a very positive development. But at some point, the conversation will shift toward real life constraints and opportunities. And that's where we as expert community, I think, should be already starting this conversation in a more like practical lens.
Thank you. Yunus, I'll turn to you with a similar question. So again, we would see that the UAE, Saudi Arabia, through their companies like Aqua Power, Master, are more active, let's say, in Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan. But as Zohra mentioned and Mohammed also mentioned, there are other projects elsewhere, like Qatar, for example, also including in those two countries, and elsewhere in Central Asia. So how would you frame the cooperation between the GCC states and China within the context of Central Asia? And why would you say that these countries, Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan, are again at the better end of receiving collaboration from China and the GCC, and why aren't others in the same position, and what could they do to scale up as well?
Yes, thanks for the question. So there's a range of reasons that why Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan actually first mover in renewable energy projects, and not only in renewable energy, but for example in the Ms. Arjan mentioned in also critical minerals, because they actively develop their regulatory framework. They try to create business environment that's favorable for the private sector, not only big private sector, international cooperation, but also small and medium-sized companies. And they actively also develop their fintech. So they not only develop the business conditions, they try to integrate for financial services to private sector works in order to optimize their workflow. This is the first factor, active dynamic regulatory framework that actually create good conditions for both state-owned enterprise and private sectors. The second, because they have the strategic locations, and they also transport infrastructure is relatively developed, particularly Kazakhstan. We know that since 2000, Kazakhstan is the most important country in the region that actually spent a lot of the capital for infrastructure development. This is also another factor that transportation reduce the transaction cost for the companies. And Uzbekistan currently follow it, try to also create another, logistical hub in the Central Asia. So their transportation hub role is very important for private sector companies, because as you know, the Central Asian countries are landlocked countries. Their current transportation strategy focus on to convert their position from landlocked to landlinked in the region. However, when you look particularly other regional countries, they also start to apply or change the regulatory framework. For example, Kyrgyzstan also 1 year ago announced its first the green energy tender by the help of the EBRD. As we saw that Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan actually steadily follow Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan the steps in order to develop their business conditions. And actually, they relatively see the result. For example, Chinese companies also plan to invest renewable solar, wind, the project in Kyrgyzstan. And also they actively involve hydroelectric projects in both Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan. And for example, we saw that one of the multilateral organization AIB, which located in Beijing, decided to also finance Rogun Dam project in Tajikistan. Also, one of the Chinese companies won tender to involve Kambarata 2 project in Kyrgyzstan. There all shows that actually they have a result. And Gulf countries also currently discuss with Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan to invest these countries. However, renewable energy is not only the field that they can cooperate. There are a range of actually fields. For example, as we saw that Gulf countries not only invest green energy, but they also involve try to involve water sector in Central Asia. Or in addition to that, there's they try to involve the middle corridor, particularly United Arab Emirates AD Group, invest the Azerbaijan, cooperate with Georgia and Kazakhstan in order to optimize middle corridor, particularly in terms of soft infrastructure. So this is also another field that actually create complementary relationship with China, because as you know, China is also another active player in the middle corridor. So as we saw that in same is also for water sector. So they are all important. However, as I mentioned, the most important things, in addition to cooperate with China and Gulf countries, the most important things about, for example, develop or involve local supplier, local companies, and relatively started to localization project, because even there's an investment or in green energy or water management from China or Gulf countries, the Gulf countries look mostly for economic diversification. Chinese companies look for export their technology and secure revenue generation. In this context, most important things for regional countries to use Gulf countries' capital and Chinese technology in order to clean up in the value chain, localize more technology from basic level to mid-level, create local employment, and try to contribute to human capital.
Thank you very much. Zohra, I'll turn to you. Earlier this morning, we were discussing with Aida about the lack of regional integration in Central Asia and the need for it to start at some point and in some fields. How would you characterize regional integration, the status of it in Central Asia at the moment, and the pursuit of it in the context of development plans by each country? Is it something of a priority? And if not, how can we make sure that it is? I will also add that I think it's important to discuss it with you, especially, when we look at the map, Central Asia and the Gulf, there is a country in between, and that's Iran. And we would say it's an elephant in the room, but it's really an isolated elephant in the room in the context of even the discussions, because obviously because of the sanctions and now the return of international sanctions, a lot of, let's say, opportunities are sidelined because of the issues that they might face. So how would you look at the broader integration and, let's say, reaching from the Gulf to Central Asia by land, by air, by sea, or however you want to look at it in the context of the broader region?
Yes, well, I think we have to ask questions the other side. Who needs to have the regionalization? For all these years of independence, we were trying to be independent of each other. For many, many years, there were attempts of donors to actually bring us together as a region. Since 2001 onwards, most of the donors were trying to invest in the regional projects. It didn't work. However, after 2016, all of a sudden, the countries decided that we have to create a region. And it was not only about middle corridor and opportunities, but it was the political will of the leaders of region to finally come together and say, after all these years of attempts of others to make us region, we have to do ourselves. So are we actually feeling as a region now? It's most probably yes. And I think Marina here and her colleague Natalia can actually talk about it logistically, that they are creating the logistics which are much more integrating the regional cooperation and trade and transportation. But from the political will perspective, that the leaders come to a point that it would be much more attractive to be a leader to a region as Central Asia for the investors to invest in the region rather than per country per capita in Central Asia. And especially, it would be always very difficult for smaller countries to compete with the larger countries in Central Asia. However, smaller countries in Central Asia have unique things, being upstream countries providing certain amount of energy and water for the downstream large countries. So there is certain natural dependencies of the countries in Central Asia, which actually also making them to complement each other. Kind of natural regionalization makes this region to be so complementing each other, making this region to be very attractive to other donors. And I'm not actually going to this whole history of Silk Road and etc., etc. We are talking about now, what it is now for a region of Central Asia, and what is attractive for Gulf states in Central Asia. And of course, there are many problems in both regions. I don't think that Gulf states do not have their own problems. But I think Gulf states also want to see what it is around them. And I think one of the large region is Central Asia, which is quite close geographically to Gulf states rather than the others. And when we say, if we want to work, and why I actually mentioned Marina and Natalia, if we want to really connect Central Asia to Middle East, we need transport routes. The communication, it's not only air communication. We need roads, we need, I don't know, fiber optics, we need electricity grids, we need so many things which would have to cross certain geographies. In this regard, Iran is somehow would play a sort of glue for GCC countries and Central Asia, because proximity of Iran to both, it's actually crucial. It's in the middle of us. And I'm not even finished talking about Afghanistan, but now we are talking about Iran. So what do we have to really offer to GCC states? We have large human capital, which could be developed for the sake of development further of Middle East. We also have resources which would be attractive to Middle East. And that's why when we look why Middle East investing in Central Asia, energy potential, it's not for the sake of energy at all. It's about future. It's about consumption of energy for the sake of development, which would be beneficial for Gulf states as well as Central Asia and the neighbors. And we are talking about development of digital economies of, one of the pillars. Digital economy will need more electricity. The consumption of electricity by digital economy starts with 3%, last year's, will grow very soon, very fast to 30% of consumption of electricity. Middle East experiencing it every day because they have fast growing, digital transformation. And we are going to have the same thing. So, what I'm trying to say, there is a regional approach of Central Asia. It's understanding on the high level of political will that unless we come together, we would not be able to succeed on the ambitions we have. Either it's going to be green economy or digital economy or any other economy. We need investors, especially looking post-COVID, rebalancing with Russia and China, etc., etc. We need to have ecosystem, regional ecosystem, which would be attractive to investors to come and invest large investments, not like small projects, but large investments. And we actually see it, like, compare, like Masdar started with very small projects in Uzbekistan and Tajikistan, and the amount of money was simply very small. Now we look at that hundreds of millions of dollars investment. There is the interest there. The question is what Central Asia gives back to UAE. Is it money? Is it the other opportunities? So it's this whole complex of questions. Does GCC group of countries feel as a region as well as we do? Do they have the same complementarity? This is another question. So it's kind of like, we look at both as opportunistically. However, Iran, with all the problems there, still there. It's not going to go anywhere. It will be there always. So the question is how we are going to see the Iran's, rational role of Iran to actually play positively for the sake of GCC and Central Asia collaboration in future. But sanctions are sanctions. We will see how it's going to evolutionize. But the bilateral collaboration, and as well as Iran being part of the certain platforms where GCC as well as Central Asia are members, are actually playing that role, that Iran is seeing itself also a very important player in the region and between the regions.
That was very important. So to move on on the same topic, I'll turn to Mohammed. One of the main things that I personally have been pushing for the Rihla initiative, and we really want to try to make sure that there is some room within the work that the Policy Council and all committee members are doing, is looking at regional integration and complementarity in investments amongst the GCC states themselves. So how can Gulf states really build a more coherent region-wide strategy rather than fragmented country-by-country investments? And what role can regional institutions, whether GCC level or multilateral, play in supporting such coordination?
Well, I mean, to answer this question, let's go back a little bit. Well, honestly, there is a momentum. If I looked at the collaboration between both regions, like a few years back, no one was talking about investing in Central Asia, literally. And nowadays, wow, things are shifting a lot. I want to say that most of the agreements or most of the projects are bilateral. When a specific country will invest in a specific country in Central Asia. However, yes, there are some talks internally in our region to invest in a regional approach within other regions, and Central Asia is one area. However, there's also concerns. There's also concerns within, their Central Asia needs to act as a region as well. As Zahra mentioned, one specific country should be, an output of one specific country should be an input for another country. And like our region wants to invest in a region where, there is, I would say, mutual benefits for both regions. It's not about, giving. It's always about giving and taking. So, okay, now, if I think Mehran, the question was, what is like a strategic approach to increase the investments?
So the main question I have is actually to see whether there can be complementarity between Gulf-backed corporations and companies like Masdar and Aqua Power, for example. They are really similar in some of their conduct in terms of their investment, and even within the context of Central Asia, it's sorry. So how can we make sure that there isn't duplication or there isn't real competition between Masdar and Aqua Power, for example, or other companies, and to make sure that they complement the work?
Okay, noted. Well, I mean, I think the right way to look at it is from a Central Asia side. So currently in our region, what we see a very good potential is power generation potential in Central Asia. And this is what Central Asia is promoting. So I would recommend, I would say if there are other areas that are, promoted and allocated, Central Asia, like GCC countries will invest in these areas. And honestly, I'll be very honest with you, when it comes to competition, we in our region likes this, because this competition offers, unique values for the clients. So we want to keep the competition, because the competition that makes us improve. So I would not focus on the competition between the companies that we have here. It's more about specifying the needs in Central Asia and promoting these needs. Honestly speaking, some of these needs are not known and are not shown. So once these needs are clearly stated, clearly allocated, then there will be different investments in Central Asia from GCC side.
This is important because the issues, let's say, are often overlooked in the context of what are the actual opportunities for investments in Central Asia. And the assumption is that everyone knows, particularly about the Central Asian countries, but they don't. And when it comes to the Gulf specifically, it requires competition with other regions, because you have to look at it, I think, within the context of the Gulf investors' eyes. They're looking at the whole world. And for them, the whole world is their oyster, so they can do whatever they want. And in that context, then, as Mohammed rightly said, it's the onus is on Central Asian players to make sure that they are presenting viable opportunities within the context of a regional cooperation or even individual investment. Thank you. I'll move to Arjan. So in the article that I mentioned earlier that you published, you also note that Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan have explicitly invited both countries to engage across the full critical minerals value chain, from exploration and processing to innovation. Why do you think this is the moment to really pursue such types of cooperation? And specifically, what would you recommend in terms of increasing such value chain approach with regards to critical minerals? But as you mentioned earlier, they also feed into other topics such as water issues, energy issues.
Okay, I think that ties very closely into what Dr. Mohammed was just saying. There's nothing wrong, I see, with competition in the region. The more companies, the better, and the momentum is right. Because, and I don't think, honestly, the Central Asian governments are not doing enough to promote themselves. I think the Future Minerals Forum in Riyadh, Kazakhstan was there. There's meetings with investors, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, everyone is there, and critical minerals topic in particular is making it to headlines in English language publications all around the place. Now, it's a different question of these risks that you mentioned about, water, stress, environmental risk, and all other risks, whatnot. So I think that we probably should have started doing it a bit earlier, but it happened as it happened. Kazakhstan, as I said, upgraded its law on subsoil 2018. Uzbekistan did it last year. They are actively digitizing the geological data. So that's number one precondition for attracting investors from everywhere, not only from the Gulf, right? The data has to be accessible to juniors or big miners from all around the world. And once it is there, then the investments are more likely to flow. Another thing that the governments are trying to do is to improve their tax regimes. So the new tax code in Kazakhstan is establishing the term royalty in the mining sector, which is supposed to stimulate deeper process. There are different opinions on how this mechanism is going to be implemented and what is going to be a rate of royalty and all other technicalities. But this alone shows that there is on behalf of governments, understanding that they need to make their systems work better. So policy reforms, tax reforms, digitalization of data when it comes to minerals. I think this is a good package to start with, making the region more visible and attractive for investors.
Thank you very much. Shaka, I'll turn to you. So where do you see the greatest disconnect between Gulf investment priorities and the development needs of the region? And specifically, what was the most surprising thing that you came up in research?
Well, thank you. In my opinion, I think that it was mentioned several times during our conversation today that a lot of projects by Gulf states are like bilateral, like agreements, and of course, like as an investors, they are more focused on scalable, bankable projects. But for the Central Asian countries, we don't need just to have investments and projects. We want those projects and investments to bring us to somewhere, to the development, to the green growth. So we can collaborate not only with our old partners, traditional partners as Russia, China, and Western countries, but also diversify our partners from the Gulf. And also, I think that we haven't touched upon it, the water scarcity in Central Asian countries, especially now as Afghanistan is building their canal, which means that the X amount of water from the Amudarya and Sirdarya river will be going to the Afghanistan, and which means that the Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, and Uzbekistan will have the less amount of water coming from this river, and which will affect the agricultural sector in those countries. And agriculture is one of the biggest economic sectors in almost all Central Asian countries. So we should also talk about this aspect as well now, because Gulf countries, they have significant and experienced projects within their countries to desalinate water, and they have the technology, they have the expertise. So Central Asian countries, we need that, and for our own development. And as a return, as we speak about the mutually beneficial cooperation, we can trade with the products of agriculture, with the food, to ensure that the Gulf countries, they will have the food security.
Fantastic, thank you. Yunus, I'll turn to you. So as was touched on by Shahlo and in all of our previous panels, one of the key focuses here, let's say, by the Gulf states has been mostly on adaptation rather than mitigation. And I want to ask whether you could explain a bit more the Chinese approach in this context of a balance between adaptation and mitigation focused projects, and whether the Chinese are also looking at adaptation in a more serious way that is required, particularly within the context of Central Asia.
So yes, absolutely. There's a growing adaptation from China and Chinese companies, because there's already changing nature between China and Central Asia relationship. Actually, when we look the past in 2000s, we saw that China-Central Asia relationship based on transaction relationship, export, import, investment to oil and gas sector, extract raw materials, build pipeline to export this raw material, oil and gas from Central Asia to China. But after the 2015, but maybe even before, after the 2010s, we saw that growing change led by Kazakhstan first, because Kazakhstan is the first country to start negotiate with China that they are not only want investment for extractive industry, but they also want to add value they don't want to only debt, but they also want investment from China in order to drive their industrialization. So since that period, we saw actually growing complexity between China and Central Asia in terms of, for example, renewable energy. We saw that China not only invest oil and gas, but also invest to solar and wind power. In addition to that, last 2 years, we saw that Chinese companies involved small hydroelectric projects in Central Asia, align their green agenda or green industrialization agenda. In terms of localization, there is not a lot of example, but in China and Uzbekistan, plan to localize wind turbine project. In just 1 month ago, there is another news that in Kazakhstan, sunny energy from China again considered to localization is some renewable energy component in Kazakhstan. So there shows that yes, they are adapting, but in terms of the 3 different sector, renewable energy, battery sector, and electric vehicle sector, Chinese companies not eager to share their critical technology, not for the Central Asia, but they also other sectors, because they saw these 3 sectors, their new champion to export the world, keep the supply chain tight, and keep their competitiveness. So in this context, what we see that Central Asian countries continue to negotiate, and they have a chance to actually not even, for example, localize whole technology, because not only China, when we look also Western countries, they are also not interested to directly share their critical technology with other countries, because all countries want to keep their competitiveness. But Central Asian countries can start to negotiate from the basic to mid-level components or technology sharing, try to create some research center in order to develop research and development, and invite some local experts in order to develop their human capital pool. And also these countries need to invest their own research and development, because the waiting to one country to take both investment and technology, actually it's difficult to get full, for example, industrialization part. But if they also start to invest it, yes, there's a room that they can also develop local technology and increase their innovation capacity in the long term. That's why actually, as I mentioned, that's the real nature of the clean up in the value chain. What China did, or Japan or South Korea did, it's not only attract investment, they promote companies to create joint venture, share their technology, increase local employment, and that's why they are currently have a cutting edge actually technological capacity. In this regard, Gulf countries has also huge potential to cooperate with Central Asian countries and try to also promote, for example, Chinese companies to localize some part of manufacturing power in Central Asia, or create training hub in order to develop skilled technicians or people for maintenance, grid maintenance, or renewable energy, wind and solar farm maintenance, or grid interconnectors in the long term. So they are all possible, but they require the proactive engagement between Gulf and Central Asian countries to align their interest in the long term, shift from project-based interaction to systematic level interactions in the long term.
Thank you very much. I'll pose the last question to Zohra, but meanwhile, I'll ask the audience if they have any questions for the panelists, please prepare them. And also for the panelists to reflect on the discussion today as a closing statement. So Zohra, some describe, we had a communication about this earlier as well, about the article Jessica Obeid wrote on Central Asia GCC cooperation. And basically, in her piece, she's writing about a green road forming between the Gulf Cooperation Council states and Central Asia, which is echoing the Silk Road's legacy, but powered by wind turbines and solar panels rather than wells. So how do you see the importance of this new green road and its significance for both the GCC, but most importantly for the Central Asian states? I think you're muted.
Yeah, sorry. I think from the perspective what Jessica described as a green road, is the way she kind of compiled all the investment, and it's true that majority of the investment goes to the particularly looking at the green development in Central Asia and being one of the more how to say fearless investors in that particular new dimension of Central Asian development of the energy. And also GCC plays some sort of like, a catalytic role in that, because not only taking this courage of coming to the unknown market and bringing their own technology and funds to an ecosystem which is not ready yet to absorb the investment of Middle East. That is actually kind of a very courageous idea of Middle Easterns to really start with this particular. But it's probably also because no one was taking the market. GCC thought that this is what they're good about, and they are coming with this investment because the experience of GCC, especially with the climate change and living in the not very easy conditions while there is lack of drinking water and all what was mentioned already, that it's going to happen with the climate change in Central Asia with water scarcity and issues related to this. GCC has that potential, and actually this whole concept of green road brings this new basically new thinking, new policy thinking with regards to the energy, because for years it was mainly about hydro and coal and many others, but not necessarily about green. And it's actually coming from the talking about it by actually showing in action how it could work and how it's going to diversify. And it's actually very interesting because Central Asia and Caucasus have a potential of 1,000 gigawatts of renewable energy, solar, hydro, wind, and etc. But only 10% is used. Only 10% is tapped now. So it's basically quite a significant market to enter if the investors would be coming in. And if the potential is quite high, why not to use this potential to bring the technology and actually bring it, do it. However, Jessica also mentioned about bottlenecks, and one of them, it was about grid integration and old infrastructures, especially when it comes to hydro and coal, when the most of the infrastructures are coming from inherited from Soviet times, and only very few have been renewed. We have a large regional project which connects Central Asia to South Asia. It's CASA 1000. And there was one idea, again, by Jessica, is how to make CASA 1000 even more prominent as a very new, technological as well as the, ultimately logistical experience. So yes, Green Road has a potential, especially what the previous speakers were saying. Hydro is going to be problematic because by 2028 we are going to have basically chronic droughts, and upstream countries are still going to do well, okay. However, the glaciers are melting quite fast, and so downstream countries will need to really find a way to deal with the issue, because the glaciers melting, it's the other issue. What we are going to do next after the Green Road works. So are we going to invest more and more in energy production, or if the GCC would want us to be more ambitious in these issues, not only talk about, climate change and, renewables, but actually do something about it as prediction rather than just following the path. So yeah, Green Road is basically a very good idea. Green Silk Road, or you can name it whatever. The question is how it's going to present, how it's going to work, and if the governments of Central Asia are going to really create a very suitable ecosystem for this investment to come and these technologies to come. And mainly, my concern would be that the technologies will be coming, but if there would be also investment in the human capital who is going to do the work for that particular implementation of all these ideas. Because what we see, and unfortunately, that human capital is being built on a very, very little way, just as a trainings, but it's not reproduced by academic and educational establishments here as a modern thinking for Central Asia, which will connect then with the Gulf states and other countries. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's great to pause here before we end it, and if there's any questions from the audience here. It would be great to hear your reflections on the panel if you are interested in sharing.
So logistics is a very interesting topic for us. As we know, the fund is too huge, and it's one of the main crossing points for all of us. So really hoping that the middle corridor would be an opportunity, not like very expensive opportunity, develop the connection. Otherwise, all of the full plans will be extremely expensive and will be covered by investors. So we're truly hoping for some new forms and some solutions which will be provided by our government with our help all together. And thank you again for this great opportunity to be part of this panel and the panel in Tashkent and in Istanbul also.
Thank you very much for joining us. So I'll turn back to our panelists for any final reflections they will have. Shackles.
Thank you very much. And thank you for for hosting us. And in my opinion, like summing up all the ideas and discussions which we had today, I think as a Central Asian, of course, and all Central Asian countries and also the countries across the Caucasus, we have to speak up about the problems which we have, what we lack in terms of the investment and green growth and engagements in the Gulf countries. So as Dr. Mohammed mentioned, that they will be aware of where are the opportunities that they can invest. And this, I think, could be a message from me to all countries across the Central Asia and the Caucasus. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Arjun.
Okay, thank you. Just summing up a couple of thesis points that I think were shared by all the panelists. I think number one is that Central Asian countries need to create an ecosystem or an environment that is conducive to attracting investments, be it from the Gulf or any other state for that matter. Second, I think Zuhra made a really good point about regionalization, about closer regional integration. And I also wanted to add that Gulf Cooperation Council has their Mineral Resources Committee. So that's their cooperation industrially about creating regional, like intra-regional supply chains. And I think that is another idea that Central Asia maybe could borrow or adopt to its local realities. And lastly, it's about finding shared interests and way to implement them in practice. So as I said in my first remark, I said that Central Asian countries want to diversify, Gulf countries want to diversify. Now the middle ground would be assuming that Gulf countries have a lot of capital and Central Asian countries have a lot of resources. For Central Asia to provide resources to certain stages of processing, perhaps until midstream, and then getting the downstream done in the Gulf, something like that. So that's how I see the vision of cooperation between these two regions.
Thank you very much. Zohra?
Yes, thank you. I think it was a very fruitful discussion, and it's very good to have think tanks meeting rather than talk tanks meeting. Looking forward that be some ideas of how we actually feel ourselves on that, because we usually have the discussions from others about us rather than, internally, what do we think about ourselves. Two regions, very interesting. Very interesting interest, as Arjun mentioned. There are interests and there are opportunities. Is this opportunities and interests much? So far, the interests are winning. However, the opportunities are still, we are still recipient of funding. What it is Central Asia can give them except for minerals, except for certain things we usually would give. So I think we have to really be critically thinking about it. And there is opportunity to do another research about this and another discussion with the colleagues from Middle East as a joint publication. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Eunice?
So the first, thank you for this meeting. I think that it's very beneficial. As a conclude remark, I would like to say that just since 2018 and 2019, the cooperation between Gulf countries and Central Asia actually developed very fast, and there is already huge impact, particularly in green energy field. Even it's the correct concentration in Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, because I believe that it will create scale up to other countries and also to South Caucasus. However, the most important things, as I mentioned, focus on, as my colleague mentioned, the regionalization, creating common ground to everybody take benefit, and also the localization, how these countries can create the environment and increase processing, taking more benefit from investment, increase local employment, contribute human capital, and also in the long term, in comprehensively, not in the one field, but in the renewable energy, hydrogen, water sector, how can they clean up the value chain? So in this context, both Gulf countries resource and Central Asian countries dynamic environment, and will be more dynamic in the near future through the regulatory change, create conditions that both sides collaborate each other and create the partnership platform that utilize other countries' technology, use it and adapt it in the local conditions in the long term. So in this context, it's very important to negotiate and create common projects like China and Central Asia did in 2015, China and Kazakhstan more specifically, create specific project between countries that align their interests, and being more specific that both sides weight each other, not only capital, not only resource, but more localization, more employment, and more contribution to industrial economic development. And I'm very positive that we will see much more positive implication in future.
Thank you very much. And lastly, we'll turn to Mohammed, who I also want to congratulate for becoming a father just recently.
Thank you, Mehran. Honestly speaking, I'm not gonna recap what has been mentioned in the session, but I really want to thank the panelists. All the points were very valid, very fruitful discussion. But I always like to add, there is honestly one strategic opportunity that I can see, and I personally can see it's going to support both regions, and specifically driving investments from the GCC to Central Asia. So I'll give a history about it, and then I'll give the recommendation. So as you know, if we look at the smart sustainable city list in the world, we will notice that 5 or 6 cities are in the Middle East. So in our region, we have a lot of smart cities, okay? And I visited Central Asia a number of times now, and I noticed that when I meet people, the people there wants to have smart cities. They want to have a very advanced cities. So I can see that urban development is not mentioned a lot. So what's happening, right? For example, in our region, I'll give you an example. For example, what's going on, for example, in Oman. Oman is a country and it's part of the GCC. So the ministry, the government there allocated a space in Oman and put some incentives and then promote these investments for the GCC countries. GCC countries, we have this zone. Here are the incentives. Please come and invest. And there are so many investments are coming in Oman. for that specific zone or city. So now, since we're talking about development, economic development, why not Central Asia countries allocate specific zones or cities with specific and clear incentives and mention it and put it everywhere. This will drive investments in urban development, and it's going to be a win-win situations for both regions. And here we're not talking about only governmental investments. It's going to be private and public sectors investments. So investments can move from the GCC all the way to Central Asia. And I want to conclude with this opportunity. Thank you.
It's a great point to raise. I'm happy that we have a focus group on green urban development, and hopefully we can carry the work forward. Thank you all for joining us in person and for those online, and I'll look forward to seeing the Policy Council and Gulf Committee members in Doha in just 3 weeks, and the rest of you can follow our work online on our website. Thank you very much to Aida again, and thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Thank you.